Claire Doyle had won 412 cases. She knew this because she kept a record, not out of vanity but because the record was evidence of a principle. Everyone deserved a defense. The system worked when every component worked. A defense attorney who won cases was the system functioning correctly. She was on a bus to a public defender conference in Brahms when the fog came down and the driver lost the road and the bus went through the guardrail. The impact threw her into the seat in front. She came up with her hand on the headrest and looked at the windshield. The fog was everywhere. The bus had gone down an embankment and come to rest at an angle, the front end lower than the back. One wheel in water she could hear but not see. The driver was unconscious against the wheel. The three other passengers, a paralegal she knew by face, two strangers, were moving, checking themselves, beginning to understand what had happened. Claire checked herself. A cut above her left eyebrow. Her ribs on the right side were wrong in a way that would become worse over the next few hours. She stood up and looked through the cracked windshield at the fog and the dark tree line beyond. She was the first one off the bus. She stood on the embankment in the rain. It was raining, she noticed, a cold and heavy rain that had not been falling before the crash, and looked at the road above them. The guardrail was gone from a 20-foot section. Beyond that, the road ran in both directions into the fog and disappeared. She heard the others behind her. She heard the driver coming around. She was about to turn back when she saw the figure standing on the road above the embankment. He was looking at her. She knew his face. She had spent 6 weeks with his face across a courtroom table, across the defense table, in her peripheral vision during testimony. She had studied his face for tells, for reactions, for anything that would help her build his defense. She had gotten very good at reading him, and what she had read had not been innocence, and had not been guilt, had been something more specific and more difficult. The face of a man who had done something and knew that she knew and was watching to see if knowing would change what she did. It had not changed what she did. She had done her job. His name was Derek Pell. He had been acquitted 22 months ago. 8 months after the acquittal, a woman named Susan Marsh had been found in her apartment. The connection to Pell had been argued and dismissed for lack of evidence. Claire had read the reports. She had read them carefully and filed them in the part of her mind reserved for things that could not be changed. Pell stood on the road above the embankment and looked at her in the rain and the fog. She turned back to the bus. She got the driver onto the embankment. The paralegal helped. The two strangers were already moving up the embankment toward the road, one of them on a phone that briefly showed one bar before losing signal entirely. Claire got to the road and looked both ways. Nothing. The fog had swallowed everything beyond 30 feet in either direction. She looked for Pell. He was 20 meters down the road, standing at the tree line, watching the group. He had not come to help with the driver. He was simply watching. The paralegal, a young woman named Rosa, she remembered now, asked what they should do. Claire said they should walk toward the nearest town. She had seen a sign for Toluca Lake before the crash. There had to be something near the lake. She picked a direction based on the sign's angle and started walking. She heard Pell fall into steps somewhere behind the group. She did not turn around. The town materialized the way bad news materializes. Gradually and then all at once, each new detail making the full shape of it worse. Low buildings first, then streets. Then the specific quality of the silence, which was not the silence of an empty place but the silence of a place that had stopped what it was doing to watch them arrive. The rain was heavier inside the town. That was the first wrong thing. Not heavier because of geography or shelter. Heavier in the way that the air itself had more water in it, as though the town were producing the rain rather than receiving it. It came straight down. It soaked through her jacket in 4 minutes. She had felt Pell behind the group the entire walk-in. Not heard him, felt him. The specific awareness of a person you have studied closely enough that their presence registers even when you cannot see them. She had spent 6 weeks learning his patterns. His footfall was one of them. He had stayed back from the group by 20 meters the entire walk, never closing the distance, never dropping further back. keeping himself separate without disappearing. She understood the calculation. He did not want to be alone in this place, but he understood she would not welcome him closer. He was right on both counts. The two strangers had fallen back at some point during the last half mile. She had noticed and kept moving. There was nothing she could do for people who chose to stop, and she could not afford to lose the driver. The driver needed medical attention. Claire focused on this. A clinic, a pharmacy, anything with supplies. She moved through the town's streets with Rosa and the driver between them, and she kept her eyes on the buildings for anything useful. The strangers were gone when she turned to check. She did not know when they had been taken rather than stopped. She had heard footsteps behind her, and then she had not heard them, and when she turned around the street was empty in both directions. Not stopped, taken. She understood the difference now. The rain came down. The fog moved between the buildings in slow currents. She kept moving. She found a building with a medical cross above the door and got the driver inside. The interior was dry and had emergency supplies, a full kit behind the front desk, the kind that suggested the building had been a clinic once and had not fully stopped being one. She got the driver onto a cot and assessed him. Concussion probable. She did the things she knew how to do and told Rosa to watch him and went to the window. Pell was across the street. He was standing in the rain with his hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the clinic. She watched him for a moment. He was soaked through. He looked the same as he had across the courtroom table, watchful, contained, the qualities she had read as calculation and defended anyway because calculation was not criminal. She went to the door and opened it. "Get inside," she said. "The rain is getting worse." He looked at her for a moment without moving. Then he crossed the street and came in. They stood in the clinic's front room and did not speak for a while. Rosa looked between them with the particular alertness of someone who understands that there is a history in the room that she has not been briefed on. The silence was specific. Not the silence of strangers with nothing to say. The silence of two people with too much to say and no framework left to say it in. She had sat across the table from him for 6 weeks and spoken to him every day, about the evidence, about the testimony, about how he should carry himself in the courtroom. She had given him careful, considered, professional guidance, and he had followed it, and the jury had acquitted him, and she had shaken his hand on the courthouse steps and walked to her car and driven home and not thought about him. She had filed the Susan Marsh report in the part of her mind reserved for things that could not be changed. She had done this with complete deliberateness. She had chosen to file it there rather than somewhere else, and she had not revisited the choice. "I know what you think," Pell said. "I don't think anything," Claire said. "I'm a defense attorney. I defended you. The jury acquitted you." "That's not what I mean." "I know what you mean," Claire said. "Stand over there. Don't touch anything." He moved to where she indicated. Rosa watched him cross the room and then looked at Claire, and Claire looked at the window, and the conversation was finished. They heard the first one 20 minutes later. It came from the street outside, a sound like wet fabric dragging across pavement, and beneath that a rhythmic impact, deliberate, evenly spaced, the sound of something moving with purpose toward a specific destination. Claire went to the window. The figure in the street was wearing robes, dark, heavy, soaked through with rain. The robes hung wrong on the body beneath them, too tight in some places, too loose in others, the fabric pulling against surfaces that did not move like a human body moves. The face was not visible inside the deep hood. In one hand it carried something that might have been a gavel, might have been something else, the shape of it wrong in a way she couldn't resolve at this distance. It stopped in front of the clinic. The hood turned toward the window where she stood. It moved. Not the slow, deliberate drift she had watched crossing the street. It moved fast, a full-body lurch that covered the distance to the clinic door in 2 strides, the robes snapping with the speed of it. The door was not locked. There was no time to lock it. Claire grabbed Rose's arm and pulled her toward the back of the clinic. She heard the door hit the wall. She heard the wet dragging of the robes on the floor. She heard the gavel thing connect with the front desk as it passed, a hard crack of impact that took a chunk out of the wood. They went through the back door into an alley. The driver was still on the cot. They had not been able to move him. She stopped in the alley with that fact and could not do anything with it. Rosa pulled at her arm and she ran. The alley opened onto a side street. She ran it to the end and came around a corner and stopped. Pell was in the street ahead. He was backed against a building wall, and in front of him was the second thing. It was not wearing robes. It had no shape she could hold in her mind for long. It was large, and it was low to the ground, and it moved in a way that suggested multiple points of articulation that a body should not have. It was wet, entirely wet, as though it had been assembled from the rain itself, from the particular cold water of this town's particular rain. It moved toward Pell in short bursts, each burst faster than the one before. Pell had a length of pipe from somewhere. He swung it and connected, and the thing absorbed the impact and kept moving. He swung again, connected again. The thing reached one of its articulated limbs out and caught Pell across the chest and sent him into the wall. He hit it hard and went sideways, and the pipe skidded away. Claire moved without deciding to move. She grabbed the pipe. She crossed the street in 6 strides and swung the pipe at the nearest point of the thing's mass. It turned toward her. Up close it was worse. Up close she could see that it was not simply wet. It was made of something, assembled from specific material. She looked at it for half a second and understood what the material was and looked away and swung the pipe again. She hit it 3 times in fast succession, each impact driving it back a step. It was not retreating, it was reassessing. She could feel the difference, the deliberateness of its attention shifting. She grabbed Pell's arm and pulled him up, and they ran. They ran 6 blocks before the thing lost them in the fog. She knew it was still there somewhere. She could feel the weight of its attention even at a distance. The rain was heavier than ever. Her ribs screamed on the right side with every breath. They stopped in a doorway and stood in the relative dryness of the entrance and breathed. "It follows you," she said, not a question. Pell said nothing. "Every time I'm near you, it finds us. It's connected to you." "I know," Pell said. She looked at him. He was bleeding from the cheekbone where the wall had caught him. He looked like what he was, a man in a town that had already decided something about him, and was in the process of carrying out the decision. "Susan Marsh," Claire said. He looked at the street. "I need you to tell me," she said. "Not for a court, not for anything except that we are in this place, and I need to know if I did what I think I did." The rain came down. The fog moved between the buildings. Somewhere in it the robed figures were moving. She could hear them, the wet drag of fabric on pavement, the measured impact of their deliberate advance. "It doesn't matter now," Pell said. "It matters to me," Claire said. He looked at the rain for a long time. She let him look. She had learned in 20 years of practice that silence was the most reliable tool for getting a person to speak. People fill silence. They cannot help it. She stood in the doorway of an empty building in a town that wasn't on any map, and she used the silence the way she had always used it, and she waited. "I had a lawyer," he said finally. "A good one." "I know," she said. "She did her job." "I know that too." He looked at her. The cheekbone was swelling around the cut. His eyes were the same as they had always been, watchful, assessing, the eyes of someone who had learned early to read a room before committing to anything in it. She had read those eyes for 6 weeks. She was reading them now. "The evidence was thin," he said. "Yes," she said, "it was. The prosecution was sloppy." "Also yes." So, she said. The rain came straight down into the street between them. She could hear the robed figures getting closer. She had maybe 5 minutes before they needed to move again. "I need to hear you say it," she said. "Not for evidence. Not for anything that goes anywhere. Just so I know." He looked at her for a long moment. The face she had read across a courtroom table for 6 weeks. She read it now in the doorway of an empty building in a town that wasn't on any map, and she read it clearly and completely, and the reading was the same as it had always been, and she understood that she had always known and had done her job anyway, and that both of those things were permanently and irrevocably true. He looked away without answering. He didn't need to answer. Neither did she. The robed figures found them an hour later. 3 of them, coming from different directions, converging with the patience of things that had all the time they needed. Claire heard them before she saw them. She grabbed Pell and they moved. They ran through 3 blocks of empty street. The figures were faster than they looked. She heard them closing, the wet drag accelerating, the impact of whatever they carried getting louder. She turned a corner and saw a building ahead with its door open. She went for it. She got through the door. She turned to look for Pell. He was 10 meters back. One of the figures had him by the arm. He was pulling against it, and his feet were moving, but the figure held and did not yield. He looked at her across the 10 meters between them. She had the door. She had a clear path. The other 2 figures were still behind him, still closing, their attention on him rather than her. She had maybe 15 seconds. She assessed the situation. She assessed it with the same precision she brought to every case: the evidence, the circumstances, the realistic outcomes. If she went back for him, the figures would have both of them. If she went back for him, she would not get out. She could see this clearly. She had always been able to see things clearly. She had done this before. She had seen the evidence and assessed it correctly and acted on her assessment, and she had been right by every measurable standard. She went through the door and pulled it shut behind her. She found an exit at the back of the building and came out onto a street she recognized, the same street where the clinic had been. She walked. The rain was still heavy, but the fog was beginning to thin. She followed the thinning, and the thinning led her to the road, and the road led her to the embankment and the crashed bus. She stood at the top of the embankment and looked down at the bus for a moment. The angle of it in the dark water, the broken guardrail above. She went down. The crash debris had spread across the embankment during the hours she had been in the town. She moved through it on the way back up. A bag split open, its contents scattered across the wet grass. A phone with its screen cracked. A notebook waterlogged, its pages swollen and mostly illegible. She picked it up without knowing why. The cover was plain. Inside the front page, a name was written in ink that the water had almost erased. She could make out 2 letters of the first name and a surname that might have been 4 letters or 5. Further in, she found a page where the ink had run less badly than the rest. 1 line still legible in the center of the page, the handwriting cramped and pressed hard enough into the paper to survive the water. She read it. She read it twice. She put the notebook in her jacket pocket and climbed the embankment. Clear air above the fog line. Stars. She started walking north. She walked for 2 hours before she reached a gas station with a phone. She called the county sheriff. She reported the accident. She reported the missing passengers. She gave her location and sat down on the curb outside the gas station and waited. The deputy who arrived first asked if she was alone. She said yes. He asked if there had been others on the bus. She said there had been. He asked where they were. She looked at the road in the direction of the town and said she didn't know. She said they had gotten separated in the fog. She answered every question accurately. The sky to the east was beginning to lighten. She sat on the curb with her correct answers and her accurate account, and her right side that hurt with every breath, and she looked at the road, and the road was empty, and the fog beyond it was still, and the town inside it was quiet, and had already moved on to whatever it moved on to after it was done with a person. The notebook was in her jacket pocket. She had not looked at the legible line again. She did not need to. It had said, "The locks are not keeping something out." She did not know what it meant. She understood that it was meant for her, that it had been waiting in the wreckage for the specific person who would know what to do with it, and not know what to do with it simultaneously. She left it in her pocket. She had won 413 cases. She did not update the record.
If you enjoyed this video, please do not forget to like, comment, or share this video with your friends. Subscribe to our channel to hear more stories like this one.